So in the 1970s or 80s, where were we with THC concentrate? What was our percentage concentration of THC in the average cannabis that people were using to get high? I heard 5, what else? 30%? Nope, not then, now, but not then. 3, yeah. 1 to 3%, and if you got really, really lucky, you got the 5% stuff. And let's face it, everybody who used cannabis, hash, marijuana, weed, whatever you want to call it, were not using it because it was a nice thing and fun thing to do. They were using it to get high, right? Anyone here who's tried it, who's used it when you were teenagers, when you were younger, you did not use it and just think, most people use it to get high, and that was 1 to 3%, maybe 5% if you got lucky. What are we at now? Legally, what can you buy legally? Yell it out, what can you buy legally? Up to what percent? 15 I heard, 20 I heard, yep. 23, yeah. Legally up to 30%. Legally, recreational stuff, 30%. 10 times stronger than what we used to use not that long ago. What will we be able to buy? That's that up to 99% concentration. This is basically taking the plant and squeezing out and making these concentrates, very, very heavily concentrated THC, up to 99%. Will that change impairment? Yeah. So it's much stronger. So it's like alcohol. I mean, it's not like alcohol, but I'm going to compare it to alcohol for one moment. If you were to pour a glass of light beer and drink it, what will happen? What will happen? Pour a glass of light beer and you drink it, what will you feel? Warm and fuzzy, I heard. A little more relaxed. Right. Will you be passed out completely plastered and hammered for the most part? Probably not. Now take that same glass and fill it up the same way with vodka. Will you feel the same way as you did with the light beer? Drink the whole thing, by the way. No, right? It's the same drug. It's both alcohol, but it's significantly stronger with vodka than light beer. And so will it affect you differently? Absolutely. Will you be more impaired? Absolutely. Will the impairment last longer? Yeah. And the next day, will you wake up feeling a lot worse with that big glass of vodka than you did with one glass of light beer? Most likely you will, right? So that is the difference between the 1%, 3%, 30%, 99% THC. These are concentrates. The other names are dabs. Shatter is a big one that people talk about. These are the pictures of them just so that you know when you find it in your kid's room or see it at work. Or they're talking about it, at least you know what they're talking about. So edibles. Let's talk a little bit about edibles and why edibles are almost a completely different drug. Because what I will argue is that smoked cannabis and edible cannabis can't really be compared, and I'm going to explain why. So first of all, from the legal perspective of what we will be able to get, they are limiting the milligrams of THC per package, which is great. And so it's going to be 10 milligrams in an edible, it's going to be 1,000 milligrams in an oil. So you're limited to what you can purchase in one sort of, not what you can purchase, but what each dose will be, basically. They are also saying that you cannot use it to have things that are, that children will like, that are appealing to children. We're not really sure exactly what that means because that's basically any food, which is generally mixed with cannabis. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to go. So probably the gummy bears will not be allowed, right? But cookies, brownies, who knows what else. There's going to be lots of different things. We talked about the drinks, et cetera. Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. When you figure out what milligrams is, we're always talking about percentage THC. Percentage actually is what we talk about with dried cannabis. But the best way to really speak about it is the milligrams of THC, and I'll give you an example. If you have an entire joint, like so you have a big fat joint, which is a gram. Let's just call it a big fat 1 gram joint, okay? And you have that filled with 3% THC. Okay, so that's 1,000 milligrams at 3%. Do the math. How many milligrams of THC? Do the math, people. 30. Okay, 30. So now, let's take 30 milligrams, right? Now, you just smoked a joint, that's 30 milligrams THC. We can argue about what actually got into you, but let's just talk about 30 milligrams. Let's now take somebody that shares a joint that's 1,000 milligrams, and it's 30%. Okay, how many milligrams is that? 30%, 1,000 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams in a gram equals how many? 300. Okay? Now, you can see the difference, 300 milligrams and 30. Well, what if I just had a puff of that, or a tenth of that? So maybe I only got 30 milligrams of THC. It's a better way to measure how much you're getting into your system. So 10 milligrams is like saying a big fat joint of 1% THC. Okay, so it's actually a relatively low dose. I mean, it's not a nothing dose, but it is a relatively low dose. So that's sort of the 10 milligrams. So we are probably better to speak in milligrams because then we know exactly what we're getting. When I asked Health Canada why it is that Canadians need to have access to concentrates of 90 or 99% THC, what is the purpose of that? Why are you legalizing that? First he said to me, well, let's talk about the purpose of legalization. What's the purpose of legalization? Money. What's the other purpose? Yeah, no more illicit market, right? So if we are not selling what they're selling on the illicit market, then we have not met our goal. That's the first thing. The second thing he did was he sent me about 3 or 4 articles of people who microdose, meaning they have tiny, tiny little bits of very, very, very concentrated THC and the benefits of that. Okay, so I won't get into all of that, but basically when we look at those people who are microdosing at very high concentrations, they may not be getting all that many milligrams of THC. So that's why it's important to talk about milligrams. So what's the difference between edibles and smoking? Because as I said, these are 2 totally different drugs. And this is what we have to look forward to. Although it'll be legal in October, the first sales cannot take place for at least 60 days after that, legal sales. At least 60 days after that. We all know that they exist out there, right? There's corner stores. You can walk by in most towns, dispensaries that sell everything under the sun. But the legal stuff will not be available until about Christmas time. Just in time for people to be doing their shopping. So what's the difference? When you smoke, you feel effects within seconds. And if you're not feeling the exact thing that you want, you smoke a little more. You want to get a little more high, you smoke a little bit more. And you can titrate it that way. People that want more will get more out of it. They'll suck more in. They'll get more in, they'll smoke more, whatever it may be. And it's just, sort of like drinking, where you kind of feel the effects, and you can titrate how much you're drinking over a period of time until you get the effect that you want. That's smoking. Now let's talk edibles. Edibles. You eat something, and you wait. And you wait. And you wait. And it may be 2 hours later that you're still waiting thinking, seriously? I didn't feel anything. But who actually waits to feel a high, right? So here's the problem. You eat something and you think, okay, I know I'm supposed to wait a little bit. Okay, I think I've waited long enough. I don't feel anything. And then you eat more. People with edibles who aren't trained and don't have the experience tend to over-consume. They eat, oh, I have such a high tolerance, I can eat more, I don't feel anything yet. They eat another one, they eat another one, they eat another one, and then it hits you. It's what they term green out. If you have teenage kids, ask them about green outs. My kids talk about it all the time. So-and-so greened out, so-and-so greened out. It's sort of a thing now. It's like passing out, but really from cannabis, or feeling really, really, really unwell from it. People don't tend to feel very, very unwell for the most part with smoked cannabis. But when you have too much edible cannabis, you do. And why is that? Okay, so we're going to go through a little biology here and physiology, but I'll make it really easy. When you eat something, it goes into your stomach. It then goes through to your liver. And in the liver, almost before most of it gets into your blood, a lot of it goes to the liver. And in the liver, it breaks it down to the very first breakdown product or metabolite. You don't need to know the name of this, but I'll tell you it's 11-hydroxy-THC. That very first breakdown product of THC that's broken down by the liver is a much more potent Psychoactive, euphoric, get high from it, metabolite, even compared to THC, what we call delta-9 THC. It is what is responsible for people feeling anxious, irritable, delusions, hallucinations, all of those really negative effects that you hear people say when they've had too much. And sometimes people are more sensitive to it. I've smoked a little bit and I was totally hallucinating. I was delusional. I was really, really paranoid and anxious. That's from that breakdown product. You get much more of that breakdown product from edible cannabis than you do with smoked cannabis. Because when you smoke it, it goes right from your lungs, right into your blood, right to your brain. And then it gets broken down as it travels around in your brain to your liver. So you don't see the same amounts of that first metabolite as quickly as you do, or at the same time, basically, as you do with edibles. So these are two totally different drugs, really, with two totally different amounts of impairment that people will feel. Different types of impairment. So what do we have to look forward to? We have to look forward to the fact that you cannot smell edible cannabis. It doesn't usually have an odor. So somebody could pack it in a lunch. Somebody could be carrying around and walking around and eating it. A brownie is a brownie, a cookie is a cookie. You guys are all going to be looking at everybody that's eating anything like that now and say, wait a minute, what are you eating there? What is that? But really, that's a bit of an issue in a workplace. And there are also the people that may have something in the morning on the way to work, and it may actually hit them while they're at work in a way that they really were not expecting. So it can happen, or later on in the afternoon if it was a lunchtime, meeting, quote unquote. So what are the impacts? You will have different impacts from smoked and edible cannabis. Edible cannabis, the effects last significantly longer. It takes longer to start and much, 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 much longer to clear out of your system. When we talk about impairment, impairment is just not the high. People talk about impairment and they think about, impairment is like when you're drinking and you're drunk, or when you're using a drug and you're high, or inebriated, or intoxicated, or whatever word you want to use. But impairment goes far, far beyond that. Because there is what's called residual impairment, and people are talking about that a bit more. It's the impairment that can go on and on and on for days to weeks after you stop a drug. We see it with all drugs. All drugs. All drugs have that residual impairment. It's the time it takes the brain to return to a completely normal state. It does not happen when you're not feeling high. When you're feeling high, it's because you have this high level of the drug in your blood that's causing you to feel high. But once those levels go down, your brain doesn't automatically turn back to normal. And it's that residual time that differs from person to person, from drug to drug. There are probably 1,000 different factors that determine how long each person will be impaired. Now, let's just pretend that chocolate at your table was an edible. Let's just pretend it's not, but let's just pretend it was. And if I got every single one of you to eat it with the same amount of THC, we would have a really, really crazy afternoon. But besides that, every single one of you will react differently. Every single one of you. Not one person will react the same as somebody else. You'll have different symptoms of that acute intoxication. It'll last a really, really long time for some of you, and others will say, yeah, I felt absolutely nothing. Right? So we cannot predict impairment. This is an issue. This is why in workplaces we are kind of all over the map. So when we look at all the companies, all right, so let me put your hands up, because I think we kind of established that most people are in safety-sensitive industries or have some parts of their workplace that is safety sensitive. So let's just do this for one moment. Okay, I'm going to get you to stand up because I'm the only thing that's keeping you from lunch, so I got to keep you active here. All right, so here we go. I want you to stand up if you have a policy or if you have told people in your workplace that they should avoid using cannabis, and I'm just going to say cannabis for now, for 8 hours or less. Stand up. 8 hours or less. Okay, what if you've said 24 hours? 24 hours, just don't use for about 24 hours because that's what's recommended in some things. Stand up, 24 hours. Okay, great. Great, okay, good. Okay, sit down. What if you have said no use ever? Like not ever, but zero tolerance. We really don't accept really any use of THC. Great. Okay, sit down. Now what if you said no use for 28 days? That 28-day thing, I'll show you the relevance in a moment. But what if it's 28 days? Not zero tolerance, but we've now put a number and said 28 days. Anyone with 28 days? No. Oh, that's surprising. Oh, we do have there. Okay, thank you. And what if you've just said, you know what? Show up to work, fit for work, or do not show up under the influence of cannabis. Stand up. Okay, so I think it's sort of equal between zero tolerance and just don't come to work fit. But you can see from that exercise that we are all over the place. And even when I speak to people from in the same industry, one company, another company, everybody has a different either policy, standard, or what they're telling people. So what's out there? The Occupational and Environmental Medical Association of Canada, OMAC, has put out a policy statement. If you haven't seen it, you can go onto their website, and it is right there. You just press, and it's right there. It is sort of at least 24 hours for most industries, and certain industries requiring longer. So this is sort of what I call the minimum. Okay? This is based on a full review of the literature, what is out there, impairment, how long impairment lasts, the idea of residual impairment, and most importantly, the fact that we cannot predict. This is not alcohol. I can give you all alcohol. I could fill all of your I won't, but I could fill all your water glasses with alcohol right now, and I can predict how long it's going to last for each of you. Some of you may feel more drunk than others, more inebriated, but I can tell you exactly when that alcohol is going to clear. I can't do that with THC. And so we have Department of National Defense, for example, that sort of has some parts that'll say 24 hours, some that 28 days. We have the aviation industry where a number of companies have said absolutely zero tolerance, and we had Transport Canada come out for certain positions to say no use for 28 days. So why 28 days? Because that's what I asked. Why 28 and not 29? And who has 28 days off of work that they could use something and then not use for 28 days and then go back to work, right? Because, I don't know, that just doesn't really happen that I see, but clearly it does. But there is actually a method to that madness. So it is easy to say zero tolerance, but what does zero tolerance really mean? So if somebody applied to your job and you said, did you ever use cannabis? Yeah, I did when I was like 13 or 14. Or a few years ago, I was at a party and I used it. Or before, when I was in college, I did use it, but I don't use it now, and I'm applying for the job I'm not planning on using. Well, zero tolerance, in theory, means can't hire them. 28 days, though, gives you a basic idea to say you haven't used in 28 days. Okay. So why 28 days? It is based on how quickly it comes out of your system, for the most part. Again, it's average. How quickly the brain, because we do see functional brain changes on MRIs, on different imaging, we see changes when people are using cannabis, when people are using THC. That's how long, on average, it takes a person's brain to return to normal functioning when we see it on imaging. When we go to impairment testing, actual cognitive testing, again, that's the average of how long it takes. So there was a bit of a method to the madness of the 28 days, and not 29, not 31, and not 24, and that's where 28 came from. And then we have people that just say don't use before work, whatever that means. Don't use at work. Show up fit to work. Don't come to work under the influence. Don't have a positive drug test, right? So people are all over the place. So let's talk about drug testing for a minute. What has changed? What have we seen? And then I'm going to get into a little bit about how you can use drug testing based on what your own policy is, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this part of my slide has not changed because I actually like this. If you can't read it, it says you're fired, Jack. The lab results just came back. You tested positive for coke. So I like this because, A, I think it's funny, but B, it is the reminder that drug testing should not just be used alone. You know, as Barb was saying, this is part of a whole policy of prevention, of treatment, of getting people the help that they need, of having people be able to come forward to say, I think I may have a problem and I need help, or I cannot work today because my doctor gave me a prescription and I feel like I shouldn't be working with that prescription, right? So it's a whole policy about being fit for work. It's a piece of the puzzle. It is not the whole puzzle, but it's a piece of it, but it can be important. So what have we seen in Canada? We have seen a huge rise in the number of companies that are adding in or changing to oral fluid testing. These are DriverCheck stats. So if you look from 2015 to 2019, and we kind of extrapolated to the end of the year so that it would make more sense, 668.8% increase in the number of oral fluid tests that people are doing. So I would like to say that's because DriverCheck has grown so much, but if we look at the urine tests, we haven't seen that big of an increase in that, only about 12.3% over that same time frame. So why is that? People are turning to oral fluid testing to narrow down the window of use of THC. Now, if you were one of the ones who stood up and you said that we either have zero tolerance or the couple that had 28 days, doing an oral fluid test is not really going to help you. Meaning, if your policy says do not use, thou shalt not use, or whatever, however you're not going to word it like that, but however you're wording it, for 28 days or zero tolerance for cannabis, but I'm only going to test you if you use in the last few hours, that doesn't really make sense. What the oral fluid test is really good for is narrowing it down to 24 hours or less than that, depending on the cutoff, for those companies who basically come out and say, you know what you do on your own time is what you do on your own time. But our recommendation is absolutely no cannabis use for 24 hours because that is the minimum standard in Canada. And there are some companies that say less than that, although nobody stood up, but I know there are because I've spoken to them. And so you can narrow the window down even more than that. That's why oral fluid is good from a THC perspective. It's actually great for all other drugs as well, and I'm happy to talk about that later. This is just another way of showing the number of oral fluid testing growing and urine with respect to the percentage of tests that we're doing. So urine testing, again, it tests for the metabolite or the breakdown product. It is not an impairment test. It tells you that somebody used. Now, we can gather that if you use, you're at risk of impairment. So essentially, it's a risk assessment. It's a risk assessment because if you use cannabis, now, if you went out and you used for the first time on Saturday night and you smoked, you had a puff of a joint with a few friends instead of having a drink, you are only going to test positive for a few days in a urine test. The whole idea that if you have anything ever, you're going to test positive for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks is actually not true. If you're not a regular user, it comes out of your system quickly. But if you use every Saturday night, or every day, or you sort of used every few months or every month, et cetera, it tends to accumulate. And then it can last for longer. So when we want to narrow it, that's why people turn to oral fluid. So DOT, US Department of Transportation, has been trying to put into place oral fluid testing for a very different reason than we are in Canada. We want to do it to narrow the window down. They want to do it because people cheat on urine tests. So the Whiznator is my absolute favorite. You can now buy it to match your exact skin color, and it comes with a bladder where you just push a button, and it now heats it up to body temperature. So you could produce a fake urine that they provide you at the same temperature, coming out of a penis that's the same color as your skin, which is really important for unobserved tests. It's not, but so I'm not sure what women do, but people do. People think, oh, nobody cheats on a urine test. Trust me, I'm an addiction physician. I see patients in my clinic. There is no reason for them to cheat on a test because they're not at risk of losing their job or anything else. They may have to talk to me about their substance use, but that's about it. And yet they still try to cheat. Even though we literally observe every urine test that they do, they still come in trying to cheat. And so if you don't think it's happening in your workplace, you're wrong, it is. Just like there are people that sell drugs at big places, at workplaces and at high schools, et cetera, they do sell kits and detox things, et cetera. They're out there. And so oral fluid testing is a swab that goes in your mouth. It's observed every single time. I'm not going to say that 100% nobody can cheat on it because I feel like where there's a will, there's a way, but it's a lot harder. So the one thing that I really want to make very clear is this. No matter what testing you're doing, be sure that it answers your question. And what I mean by that is this: is if your policy is no use for 24 hours, then your drug test should answer the question, did they use within the last 24 hours? If your policy is do not use any THC, 0 tolerance or 28 days, then your drug test should answer the question, did they use in the last 28 days? So to have a 0 tolerance policy and do oral fluid is probably, I mean, it's not bad, but it doesn't give you all the information you need. To say that you can't use for 8 hours and then do a urine test is also not answering your question. So when you call me and you say, did they use within the last 8 hours, I'm going to say, I don't know, what did they say? Because I can't tell you from the urine test. But if you did an oral fluid test at the proper cutoff, we can certainly narrow it down a lot more. So just be sure that if you're doing drug testing, that it does answer the question that you want to know. Figure out what the question is and speak to somebody to figure out what the best test is for you. Because often we find that people's policies and what they're doing do not match. And that makes it much more difficult if a problem arises. Okay, we have a little time for CBD. So CBD, I want you to stand up one more time because I see you're getting a little tired here. Stand up if you've had an employee come to you and say, can I use this CBD oil at work? Everyone up, because it was probably most people. Okay, all right. No, hold on, stay standing, stay standing. I only want you to sit down if you think you have a really good answer to that question. Okay. So I'm hoping I'm going to provide you with a little bit of an answer. All right, so let's talk about CBD. You can sit down, unless you want to stay standing. CBD, cannabidiol. It is non-euphoric. You don't get high from it. When people say it is not psychoactive, that's actually wrong. The term psychoactive means it goes into your brain and it has an action on your brain. It is psychoactive. And even the guru of cannabinoid medicine, Dr. Ethan Russo, will tell you it is psychoactive. It goes into your brain and affects your brains. What it's not is euphoric. You won't get high from it, and it does not have an addictive potential. World Health Organization came out with that a year or two ago now. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't cause any actions in your brain. It does. It does. There are side effects, somnolence, sedation, et cetera. There's a medication in the US. It's not approved here in Canada, but it is in the US, and it's specifically for the treatment of 2 very rare and very serious forms of epilepsy in children. That's the only thing it's indicated for. But it is CBD, and it's made in a pharmaceutical company, and so it gives us a real good idea of side effects, what we call adverse events, side effects, reactions, et cetera. And somnolence and sedation are right up there. Now, if you are tired and sedated from any medication, it does not matter whether this is prescribed or not, it is impairing. If you're working in safety-sensitive work, you should not be on any medication that causes you to feel that way. And so it may not be psychoactive, it may not be euphoric, but it certainly can be psychoactive, meaning that it's affecting your brain, causing you to feel sedated and therefore potentially impaired. So right now, and this is where it gets a little tricky and messy, there are 2 ways, and only 2 ways, to buy legal CBD in Canada. One is from the province stores or online sales, the recreational side, and the other is with a medical authorization from a Health Canada licensed producer. And yet, you can go online very easily, type up CBD, and in 5 seconds you can have an order. You can go into stores, you can go into the corner store. I was at a convenience store around the corner, and they were selling CBD oil, which said no THC, THC free. So why can they say that, and why is that not legal, and yet you can go to a farmer's market and buy it also? So I'll tell you. Hemp, there's hemp, and there's the cannabis that we get THC from. So what is hemp? Hemp is actually a cannabis plant with less than 0.3% THC. Not 0, but less than 0.3. That's what classifies it as a hemp plant. In Canada, you are legally allowed to use that to produce a whole bunch of things, but not CBD. You can grow it so that you can extract CBD from it, but the only people that are legally in Canada allowed to extract CBD from anything, including hemp plants, are Health Canada licensed producers. So all of that hemp oil, everything that you see is actually illegal. Every time someone comes into you and says, can I use this CBD oil? I bought it at the store, I ordered it online, I got it from a friend. It's actually not legal. Now, I'm not saying that they should be brought up on charges, but there is no oversight. There is no quality control. There is nothing to say that what it says on the label is actually what it is. And there was a study done that looked at these hemp CBD products. And what they found is that the vast majority of them do not have what it says on the label. They don't have the amount of CBD that it says on the label, and they do not have the amount or non-existent amount of THC that it says. Often it has THC, even though it says that it doesn't. So then you have people that have it, they are taking this, because the people that are using it are not using it to get high. This is not something, truthfully, it's people that are older that have an ache or a pain or whatever it may be, and someone said, oh, you should try this. It's really, really good for arthritis. It's really, really good for migraines. It's really, really good for anxiety, for sleep, for all of these things here that people claim that it's really good for, which is basically everything. I'm not saying it is, but that's what they claim. The problem is that they take it, and now they have a positive drug test, and they're saying, what are you talking about? I'm not taking marijuana. I don't use cannabis. I don't smoke. I don't eat edibles. I don't have anything. Do you take CBD oil? Yes, but it says no THC. But it can have THC, and it can end up testing positive. So it can be a problem from a drug test perspective. But let me tell you that if you're testing positive on a drug test, you have enough THC getting into your body to cause a risk of potential of impairment. So can I tell you that those CBD products are safe? Absolutely not, because we have no idea what's in them. If you're buying it legally, it's a different story, and we'll talk about cannabis for medical purposes. But really, the studies are very, very limited when it comes to CBD, despite the fact that it's all over the internet, and probably, everybody can probably name a handful of people that they know who are using CBD products for their pets, for their children, for their mothers, for their grandmothers, grandfathers, uncles, whoever. We all know people are using it for everything under the sun, but there really is not a lot of literature to support that. When we look at people that say that they're using cannabis for medical purposes, real cannabis for medical purposes, that's about 13% in a study in 2018. But when you ask them how many of you have an authorization for, like a legal authorization from a physician, 66% of the people that say that they're using it for medical purposes do not have an authorization. So when you're at work and somebody says to you, look, I have an authorization to use it for my back pain or my headaches or my acne, I've heard that one, or hair loss, doesn't work, but I have heard that. Most of them actually don't have a legal authorization. Why are they using it? It's because nothing else is working, they want to try it, they heard it's good, there's a lot of stress out there, and you know what? Let's try anything that we can to take away that stress, to cope, to deal, etc. Some people get a tub of ice cream. Some people smoke a joint. Some people have a glass of wine or a drink or pills. But at the end of the day, there are many people that are looking for something to take away some of those symptoms. Just what we heard this morning from Alan, right? That's self-medication. So let's talk about medical cannabis for a minute. We have legal cannabis, and so the thought from everybody was, we're not going to have medical cannabis anymore. Why do we need it? Just go to the store and buy it. And yet the numbers continue to increase. So these are the latest stats that were available up to June 2019. And you can see it's increased. 363,917 Canadians with an authorization for cannabis for medical purposes. But remember, a whole number of people on top of that are using it, quote unquote, for medical purposes without an authorization, right? So we were in this world of cannabis, reefer madness. Cannabis is horrible, it's awful. We're now sort of swinging the other way where cannabis can be used for absolutely everything and should be. I read some posts online saying, CBD should be put in our water. Everybody should be using CBD. We are all deficient in CBD. Our endocannabinoid systems, the systems in our body, need CBD and cannabis. It's natural. We should all be taking it. So I think we need to wait for it to fall somewhere in the middle. There probably are some good effects for some people of cannabis for medical purposes. And if I had a disease that was very debilitating, and I've literally tried everything on the market that physicians, naturopaths, whoever can offer me, and I still am getting no effects, and there's some case study that says it could be used for whatever I have, I'm going to try it. But that does not mean that I should be working in a safety-sensitive job, right? Just because it's not, just because it may be indicated or there may be reason to be able to use it, doesn't necessarily mean that they're safe. So how do you determine safety? Right? Medical people coming in with an authorization, a real authorization for cannabis for medical purposes, are coming to you and saying, well, my doctor told me I have to use it. I'm using this now. I have a right to use it because my doctor said so. And since my doctor told me, I can still work. Right? How many times have you heard that? You don't have to stand up this time. How many times have you heard, my doctor told me, and therefore I have to work? That could be for any medication. Right? So what I would urge everybody to do is to look into everything. And I'm going to say that this probably goes for other medications. Not probably. It does go for other medications. This should not just be for cannabis. Opiates, benzodiazepines, pain medications that are non-narcotic but are very impairing, medications that are used from a mental health perspective. All of these can be very impairing. And yet, often, companies would be like, oh, your doctor told you can use Percocets. Sure, no problem, go work. You're fine. Your doctor said you're fine, go, you're fine. But then as soon as they say it's cannabis and the doctor says it's fine, oh no, we can't trust what the doctor says. Which, as we heard from Barb, in a couple of the cases, they did come out to say that general family physicians and primary care providers do not know about hazards in the workplace. But that's just not for cannabis. That's for all those other medications too. So when they say they're safe, really think twice about it for all medications that can be impairing, because it's not just cannabis. Everything should be treated the same way. But I urge you to make sure that you're looking into it. Make sure it is legal cannabis for medical purposes. Make sure that they are buying it from the Health Canada licensed producer. If they have an authorization, but they're buying it from Joe down the street or even from a recreational store, it's not cannabis for medical purposes. Cannabis for medical purposes is an authorization, purchases from a Health Canada licensed producer, of which there's now 232, is that the number? Something like that? Yeah, whatever, 200, 300, whatever it may be. That's where they need to be purchasing it from. And not just, oh, I had one purchase a year ago and I'm still using the 1 gram that I purchased then. No, you're not. Right? Your doctor told you to use 1 gram a day and you're telling me that 1 gram that you bought lasted you a year? I don't think so. So these are all the things that you need to look into. And then it is really about asking questions. And if you can't do it, get somebody to do it for you. But questions like, is there a need for this? Is this reasonable? Are there other alternatives that are non-impairing that will allow them to work in the workplace, and are they safe to work? So a couple years ago at DriverCheck, we had so many people come and ask us. And the only option at that point was really to go to an IME. And they had lots of people coming forward now with cannabis for medical purposes. You do an IME for all those people, it's like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. So we developed what we call a medical cannabis review program, where we review these types of situations. And we look at all of these questions, and we do all of the things that you may want to do but may not have the resources to be able to do, or may want a third party to do it for you. And it's been very helpful for a lot of cases. What's our timing like? Okay, I'm not going to go through the cases, but if you want to talk to me about it, I'll go through with you, because I just want to make sure we get to everything. Because we do have to manage risk. The issue with cannabis is this. We do not have all the answers. In fact, we don't even know all the questions to ask. Because cannabis isn't only about THC and CBD. There are over 100 other cannabinoids that go to your brain and affect your brain. Some of them are probably really psychoactive, euphoric, etc. We don't even have the information about them. And not only that, there are another 400 chemicals in cannabis that also go through to your brain and impact how your brain functions. They are psychoactive. Are they impairing? Can you work with them? We don't know. We don't have the answers. That's why this is so difficult. The other part of it is that everybody, as I said, will respond differently. It's non-linear, and we cannot predict it. Not predictable. Right now, with drug testing, it's not a test of impairment. It is a test of risk or a test of recent use that's been linked to impairment. Even oral fluid test is a test of the time frame of use, but if you use within that time frame, the likelihood of impairment is very high. It's not alcohol. It's legal, just like alcohol, but it is not the same and shouldn't be treated the same. So the idea of, well, they can drink on the weekend and be fine to come to work, yes, they can, because in your body we process it very differently than we do THC. The effects on the brain are vastly different than they are with alcohol, so we cannot treat it the same. And we really, really must consider, I won't use the word Trump, we really must consider the fact that safety does override everything else, because it is your responsibility. So as a bottom line, what I will say is this: legal, authorized, illicit, it really doesn't matter. Cannabis is cannabis. What you get from even from a medical authorization can be the exact same stuff that they're buying at a recreational store. So just because it's medical and authorized does not mean that it's safe. You need to look into it. And CBD, all of that stuff that they're bringing you isn't legal. No quality control, no oversight. What it says on the bottle is in all likelihood not what it really is. So be careful with that. Because sometimes we're just saying, oh yeah, it says THC, fine, you're fine, but they may not actually be. So that is all. I got through that very quickly. Okay, but I think we have time for questions. Yes?
Your oral fluid test, does it test for delta-9 THC, hydroxy-THC, carboxy-THC?
So the oral fluid tests that are done in the lab only test for delta-9 THC. So what happens is you smoke or you eat something, and the remnants of the delta-9 THC, that's the active ingredient in the cannabis plant of the THC, like that's the active part of it, stays around in your oral cavity. Over time, it gets absorbed to the rest of your body, but while it's still in your oral cavity, that's what we're picking up from an oral fluid test. It is not a reflection of how much THC is in your blood, but what we know is that if you have a positive oral fluid test, you had recent use of THC, and you tend to have positive blood tests at the same time frame as you're going to have a positive oral fluid test. So they happen in parallel, but they don't happen because of each other, because it's not from it coming from the blood to the oral fluid the way it is with other drugs. So cocaine, for example, is in the oral fluid because it came from the blood to the oral fluid, but not THC. So we don't test for 11-hydroxy or the metabolite. It can be tested for in studies, but not, as of right now, the labs don't test for it.
You don't test for any primary or secondary metabolism?
No. Right now we can't. It's not an option. If the DOT does actually pass through their proposed guidelines for oral fluid testing, and if those proposed guidelines include 11-hydroxy-THC or the metabolite of THC, then in all likelihood that will be added to the lab and it will be an option to be testing. But as of right now, all the labs that do oral fluid testing for THC in Canada, well, are one in Canada, and in the US are only delta-9 THC, for the remnants of THC that are there after you smoke or you eat. There was another question here somewhere. Yeah? Oh.
I want an update.
Okay, so the question was, because I had said a couple years ago that my mom said to me one day, you know, my mom's 70 years old, and my mom got married when she was 20 and then had us. She had 4 kids, and so, you know, she didn't grow up in the I used, you know, smoked weed and hash and all that kind of stuff. And so she says to me, as soon as they announce it's going to be legal, I cannot wait for it to be legal. I really, really, really want to try cannabis, my 70-year-old mother. Of which I said, that's fantastic, but I don't want to be anywhere near you. And she still has not tried it. Although because she doesn't want to smoke. But I suspect, truthfully, that once edibles are legally available, because she won't get it otherwise, that it may be a different story. So ask me next year and I'll tell you.
Hey, I just want to say thank you for all the great work.
Sorry, I don't
DriverCheck.
even know where you're coming from. It's hard to see. Oh, sorry, there you are now.
I've
Sorry,
got
yes.
the mic. I just want to say thank you for all the great work that all of you do. The presenters so far have all been fabulous. And just a comment about edibles. I mean, people are making stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're baking many different things and creating many things, and who knows what strength it is. So.
And you're right, actually, because right now you can legally buy and make anything you want to. That's legal, right? So edibles are not a new thing. but they're going to be more prevalent, right? For those that aren't the connoisseurs right now that are baking it themselves.
I have a question. We have a lot of people that ask questions about whether they can use CBD hand lotions or body lotions. Is it possible that the THC content in there could get into their bloodstream?
Okay, so it's a very, very good question. I'm going to say yes and no. So this is why I'm going to say yes and no. A, these are some of the things that we don't have all the answers to. But what I'll tell you is this, is that so the ones that you can buy right now at Shoppers Drug Mart, for example, that say they contain CBD, it has like minimal amount of CBD to begin with, and very, 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 if any, minimal THC. I'm not saying none, because again, not a lot of quality control. So what we know is that if you rub any THC on your body, it's going to go through your skin to your blood the way everything that you put on your skin does. But interestingly, there was a recent study that showed that people that were using creams and oils on their skin did not have blood levels of THC. So this is really interesting. I can't really explain it. And so that's why my answer is going to be yes and no. I tell people up until the time I saw that study that anything you put on your body or in your body that has THC is going to get in your body and cause impairment. I'm not sure why this particular study did not show any blood levels of THC after rubbing it on. And if it didn't, then maybe it's the molecule is too large to go through the skin. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. So I think right now the answer is anything you put on your skin, if it has THC, will go into your bloodstream and can affect your brain. But we may have a different answer in a year or 2 or 3 or 4 from now.
With reference to the hydroxy THC metabolite and the edibles as well, if you said before, I think, that you can test for it, you're just not currently testing because you're not allowed to or whatever in the oral fluid. So if you were allowed, would the period of detection significantly change because it's now coming from the blood?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So in the studies that do look at 11-hydroxy-THC in the oral fluid, it is a reflection of it coming from the blood, meaning that you ingested it, it went to your liver, it broke it down, so nobody can claim that, you know, it was in the air and that's why it became positive, which isn't a thing, so, you know. But it does go from the blood to right into you. So if it's an edible, it will last significantly longer than if you smoke it. So in edible form, we see the presence of 11-hydroxy-THC for upwards of 12 to 24 hours. And that's how long it's going to acutely impair you or intoxicate you. So yes, it is a much more prolonged positive test in the oral fluid. The levels aren't very high, so you have to have the ability to test it at a very, very, very low level like they do in the studies. But certainly it would give you sort of that prolonged one, which is truthfully why the US is looking at it, right? The addition of 11-hydroxy or the metabolite of THC that we would test for the same one in the urine in oral fluid from a DOT perspective is because they want to pick it up for as long as possible, and they want to be able to say with 100% certainty that this is coming from your blood, therefore you used it. And so the idea of what we call passive inhalation, secondhand smoke, is not an issue, which is not an issue. So I can talk more about that another time if you have a question about that, but I don't want you to think that it's a reason for a positive test. It's not. Is there another question there? Yeah?
Yeah, right.
Oh, sorry. I think I overstepped because I didn't see. Someone else first?
Yeah, sorry, just over here.
Okay,
Yeah.
then you'll next then. Okay.
Sorry, just one, and I don't know if it's, I'm getting too far ahead, but what we're seeing is, I think with the legalization of cannabis, that people are obviously using more of it, but there's also other medications or other drugs that people are using in conjunction with that. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious if there's any work being done to look at not just, you know, we're talking a lot about alcohol content or cannabis, but combination of drugs causing impairment and being able to narrow down potential impairment even if those levels of drugs are falling underneath a threshold, but combinations where we can comment on impairment.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Combinations of drugs, whether it's alcohol and THC, cocaine and THC, benzodiazepines and THC, any combination of anything impairing plus anything impairing it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's probably 1 + 1 = 10. because they affect each other differently, which is why we see different laws and different levels of, in the police when they talk about if there's alcohol at this level and THC at this level, that is still a charge equivalent to 0.08, even if with a lower alcohol, because again, a little bit of alcohol and a little bit of THC causes a lot of impairment, and it's the same thing with any other drug that you're using in combination. So, you know, I guess from a detection perspective, in theory, somebody could use benzodiazepines, and maybe you don't test for it, and they've used THC, and they're highly impaired. You know, is it just from the THC? Probably not. It's probably from the combination of the two, right? If you're not testing for it, you may not know, but we know that anything plus anything can cause great impairment and intoxication. Is there another question?
Is anybody testing, or is there any way to check the impairment on people who use proper medicinal CBD oil over a long-term period? Is there any way to check their levels of impairment? Is there anybody looking at is there cognitive, or is any of that stuff being discussed or checked? Or
So it's a very good question. It is the one thing that I really, really, really would like to do a study on, and I don't do studies, but I really, really would like to do one to see if people who use medical CBD oil, so from a Health Canada licensed producer with less than 1 milligram per mil of THC, and they're, let's say, using a total of 2 or 3 milligrams of THC per day, never anything more, not using any other THC products at all, are they impaired at work or not? Do they have a positive drug test or not? We do not have all the answers. What we do know is that a little bit of THC is what we used to use to get high. So can I say with 100% certainty that they're not? I can't at this time. Are they less impaired than someone who's using 300 milligrams of THC? Absolutely. Because it is sort of that, you know, there is a scale, right? But, you know, and when you use it every single day, it's different than when we do these studies and we give it to people once or twice or 3 times. Because it accumulates, it stays in your fat cells and accumulates there, and then it comes in and out of your bloodstream, and that's how it works. And so daily use of something, daily use of cannabis, even with tiny bits of THC, is very different than a one-time use of cannabis with a little bit of THC. And that is the thing that we do not have the answers for yet. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't. It's the one thing that I really, really would like to know when anyone asks me. So are we good for time? Good.
can I add one more comment to that,
Yes.
if you don't mind? And I'll do this at the risk of hopefully not being ridiculed, but I've been using medical CBD for the past year, and you actually drug tested me a few months ago, and I tested positive for THC. The stuff that I use is very high CBD, very low THC. I use 1.5 milliliters per day. I take it orally under my tongue. And the reason I take it was I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in 2017. Today I'm cancer-free, happy to say. Thank you. But, and I know there's no test for it yet, but I will tell you this, that I've been using this for a year. I know what intoxication is. I know memory loss, I understand that. I'm very, very cognizant and aware. And as far as I can tell, I have 0 impairment, 0 memory loss. My motor skills are 100%. I don't drive tractor trailer anymore. I'm in the office, but I still drive a vehicle to work every day and home. You know, so
And I hear you.
to me, there's huge benefits to it.
Absolutely.
But we got to figure out what it's doing to us as well.
Yeah, and I agree with you. So what I would say is this, is that there are a number of people that have found tremendous benefit from CBD oil with very low THC, who use it under the guidance of a doctor, where they've tried 1,000,001 other things, or they're at that last resort of, I just need something, kind of like what I said before. If I was told that I had something and there was some case study that CBD oil is going to help me, I'm going to try it. But the problem is that we don't have all the answers to say with 110% that no, your people will not be impaired. You may not be impaired, but you know, maybe if I took it, I would be. I don't know. Right? And impairment looks different, right? Executive functioning and all of those higher order functionings, cognitive functions are different for everybody, and the impact of all of this is a little bit different, which is why we don't have all the answers, but hopefully we will get there. With legalization, it's allowed us to be able to do more studies. So I'm hoping to have more answers every year. So thank you very much, everybody. And I am here if you want to ask any questions. So.